the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Today's edition of the Spot Track Podcast is presented by Better Edge. If you dabble in the world of sports gambling like most sports fans do these days, you're probably looking for something a little bit different, a brand you can trust that's going to give you the power to control the odds and the edge as you're placing your bets. Better Edge understood this problem and solved it. Too much money was being lost when the lines were favored towards the house. This is a social betting marketplace. There's an iOS app. It's in 45 plus states and growing. And you have the control. You get the power. Use code SPOTTRAC, SPOTRAC at sign up. Get yourself $20 on the house to get going. Place a bet on these NBA finals, these NHL finals, or how about some of this ramping up Major League Baseball content that we'll get to in just a few minutes here on the Spot Track Podcast. Again, that's betteredge.com. Use code SPOTTRAC. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Monday, June 9th. Big tennis weekend. I mean, cup of coffee and a beer at lunch to watch the men's final on Sunday. But well worth it if you gave yourself an opportunity, or please go back and watch those highlights. $2.5 million handed out to Carlos Alcaraz and Coco Gauff, respectively, for the men's and women's championships at Roland Garros. And of course, plenty of other action to discuss. We're going to shelve the basketball stuff for Thursday, probably with Keith Smith again, because I have a feeling we'll be trending towards a series result at that point in time. Not to put words in the Thunder's mouth, but it kind of feels like the momentum has shifted for good in that series. And we're going to have to talk hockey at some point here, because it appears as though this is going to be a long, arduous series, as expected. A rematch series, by the way, with tons of polarizing characters, none bigger than the face of the league in Connor McDavid. And there's a real chance over the course of the next week here that the game's best player gets his first Stanley Cup. And that will be a very important milestone, because if it's been a minute since you've dove into Connor McDavid statistically, enjoy that ride, because there aren't very many ways you can slice what he's been doing to start his career that don't have best of all time path or already achievement labeled next to it. And the best part about it is, if you don't want to nerd out and you just kind of want to be a closet hockey fan at times, just watching him on TV, or especially in person, is a spectacle. So if for nothing else over the course of the next week, I'm telling you, you're getting a great series every night, but just to be able to watch him skate and maneuver and puck handle is worth your time. And we'll get to some of the numbers and some of the salary cap information, by the way, and implications headed into the offseason for both those two teams. At least Edmonton-wise, feels like they're in a must-win situation. So we'll get to that as the series kind of approaches the time to flip the switch. Let's talk a little football off the top here. The Packers have done the expected and are expected to release Jaire Alexander, their longtime star cornerback, by the end of business today. No guaranteed money left, so this is a pretty clean break. And they were simply just sort of waiting out the spring and seeing if they could find any kind of trade partner. He was owed $17.5 million cash. It was 2 for $37 over the next 2 seasons. Still a really nice player. When he's on the field, he's producing, which kind of makes him hard to value here going forward. But unfortunately, this has been about injuries and time missed over the past couple of seasons. It's not the most drastic situation we've seen, but 2021, he played 4 games, 2022, 16 games, and then each of the past 2 seasons, only 7 games. So obviously, this is a player that the organization, the front office, and the fan base has been having mixed signals with, because this is your number 1 pick back in 2018. He was exceptional out of the gate, peaking year 3 when he got that big extension at $21 million a year, which kind of held as the high mark for quite a while here at the cornerback position. But no, he's no longer in this contract, and the dead cap is somewhat significant as a post-June 1st release now. 7.5 this year, 9.5 next year. But I can tell you right now that from a savings standpoint, this actually hands Green Bay $17 million to work with this summer. Could be rolled over into next year. and another 17.5 next year. So that helps. And by the way, that's always why this was going to get here. The 17.5 wasn't a tradable entity. Yes, you could have ripped this thing up and started over, but why give up a draft pick when you could have just waited out today, which is an outright release? I've seen a lot of yin and yang conversations between Jaire Alexander and Jalen Ramsey in Miami, and they are extremely different conversations. The money is somewhat similar, right? So Jaire had 17.5 this year. Jalen Ramsey's on 21 and change this year for Miami, but that's a fully guaranteed situation for the most part. That's a 1-year full guarantee at $20 million and change for Jalen Ramsey. I don't expect a team to give up assets and take that full salary on, but this should be the start of the conversation of, okay, are we going to go lowball 1-year prove-it deal for Jaire Alexander? I referenced on Twitter this morning, Tre'Davious White kind of went through this in Buffalo. He was released. The Rams picked him up last season on a 1 for 4.25. That could max out at 8 with incentives. He played fairly well, though he was kind of banged up at times. And now he's back in Buffalo on half that price. So you're going to see Jaire get a prove-it contract, which we've seen work out successfully for the player, and obviously slide backwards into near minimum contracts as well. So my expectation, just based on his production, the pretty good comparison between him and Tre'Davious White from a career standpoint, and now the adjustment of the cap for 2025, there's a very real world where Ramsey can max out at 10, maybe 12 million in 2025 with what I would imagine is a pretty good number of teams, right? The Raiders, the Eagles, Baltimore, Dallas for sure, just to name a few off the top of my head that are definitely making phone calls this morning to hell. If Miami moves on from Jalen Ramsey, right, and saves themselves a little bit of cap and cash, bringing in Jaire Alexander on a showcase deal, not the worst replacement 1-to-1 there. If you're looking to stay somewhat competitive in the AFC East, but get off the Ramsey contract. So there may be a connection down the line, but in terms of how these things are going to be handled process-wise, two very different situations. Teams are waiting out Green Bay's release of Alexander. Teams are not waiting out with Miami because he's got the fully guaranteed salary / option bonus in 2025. So that one's still pending. We'll see where that gets us. But an unexpected move out of Green Bay, which now puts them top 5 in cap space for 2025. They are now 4th with a little over $45 million to work with. That list is Patriots, Lions, 49ers, Packers, and the Arizona Cardinals rounding out the top 5. And just for good measure, the bottom of this list is Buffalo at just over 2 and change, the Giants, the Falcons, the Chiefs, and the Texans, who are expected, by the way, to sign Nick Chubb to a 1-year contract to bolster the Joe Mixon, somewhat banged up running back arsenal behind CJ Stroud for 2025. So plenty of moves still coming. I've highlighted quite a few potential extensions over the course of the next few weeks and months, and maybe not till next offseason, but that piece is still live and churning on Spotrac.com. I'm going to talk about a few of those names right here before we flip the switch. The plan here today, by the way, a little bit of NFL and then a little bit of baseball to discuss, some of the mid-range teams that are floundering a little bit out of the gate. And is it kind of too late to resurrect their season? Are we starting to think buyers, sellers? Dan Soemann is doing just that, by the way. So he's got trade candidates, the buy-sell team situation tiers, and plenty more content that we can start to preview as we head towards that July 4th kind of cutoff, where the league kind of looks around and looks at itself and says, all right, who are we and what's our plan for the next 3 weeks before this trade deadline? Can we strike big? Are we sitting on our hands? Dan Soeman's going to try to sort out some of that early discussion in the next couple of minutes here. NFL extensions. It's tough to believe anything right now. A lot of these organizations are heading towards the summer off season where they get a bit of a break. So a lot of what's being talked about right now or put out there right now, maybe even handed to the Schefters of the world to be put out there, is for the better part of negotiations, okay? Because a lot of these negotiations will get tabled for the course of the next couple of weeks, right? Which is why we end up seeing a huge burst of them around training camp, and then certainly right before the beginning of the season for those players who are holding out to the very last second to get the most maximum leverage that they can, right? Some of these names have already started with that. And I think the big one, though it won't be the biggest contract we discuss, is James Cook in Buffalo, the running back who was kind of first on a list of 7 or 8 extension candidate names to come out publicly and say, I'm definitely looking for top of the market money, and I want to be here in Buffalo with that money. And Buffalo was pretty quick to turn around and say, okay, get in line because we got 7 other guys to get done. By the way, they got all of them done. And oh, by the way, 15 is ridiculous. Okay. They've got a price. That price is probably in the 9 to 11 per year range. And, it's a 2-year guarantee because unfortunately that's what running backs get right now. You get a 2-year guarantee. And if you're still worth a damn a year and a half into that 2 years, you'll probably get another 2-year guarantee. And then that'll be it. And unfortunately, that's the life of running back in this league right now. After that, if you're still cooking, it's 1 year's. It's 1 year showcase deals pretty much for the remainder of your career. So you can understand Cook aggressively going out there, trying to force the issue, trying to start the bidding high. Let's put it that way. Okay. I don't think there's anybody with sensibility that thinks that James Cook's gonna garner a 4 for 60, 30 of that fully guaranteed. That's inconceivable for a player who isn't in the top tier of his position. He's not a 3-down back that is there to protect Josh Allen and be, a 50-plus pass catcher and be a 2-down running back who's loading up on 15 to 1,700 yards on the ground on an annual basis. What he did do very well is find the end zone. And what he did do better in 2024 is not fumble the ball. A huge issue in 2023 before that got ironed out last season. One of the ways they ironed that out, by the way, is reducing his snaps. Okay. He played 45% of the snaps last year versus 55 in 2023. So when you look at it from that angle, it's another reason to not pay this player at the top of the market. He's an exciting player. He's an electrifying player at times. He's a big part of this Buffalo offense. But is he irreplaceable? I don't believe the Bills think that way, which means it's going to be our price or no price, which means this is going to be a heck of a holdout here. Will it lead to an eventual trade? I don't believe so. It should be noted that Cook did produce enough and did play enough over the course of his first 3 seasons to garner the full proven performance bonus for 2025, which means his salary is now over $5.2 million, up from about $1.4 million on a second round rookie contract. So he's making a good chunk of change just by being who he is. But obviously this is about the future and at least 2 more seasons of full guarantee here. I think Buffalo wants to play ball with this. Just kind of reading the tea leaves here locally. And oh, by the way, this is not just a one-sided conversation. Kyren Williams in Los Angeles is in a very similar boat. He's got a little bit more of an injury history than James Cook, but it's not anything that should be considered a red flag in negotiations. It's just, hey, we got a $55 million quarterback and a bunch of defensive players locked up, et cetera. They just had to redo Stafford a little bit. And that's a very fluid situation in Los Angeles in terms of the quarterback position. But they did have a decent free agency in terms of acquiring Devontae and some things like that. So there's some mouths having been fed out there. But I think both these teams feel like, financially speaking, roster construction standpoint wise, they could handle a 2-year bump out, a 2-year extension guarantee for this position and these players respectively. So I have a feeling that these two camps are watching these situations closely, and it's going to be a bit of an arduous battle. So where does it land? I can tell you right now, both of them financially value about the same, between that 10 and 11 mark, mathematically speaking. And again, it's not going to be more than a 2-year guarantee. What happens if they hold out? It's a very fair question. If these holdouts, and I'm not even here to tell you that holdouts will happen, but let's say these players hold out into training camp. It's going to be $40,000 fine per day. Because these players are on rookie contracts, they can waive those fines from a team standpoint. So there can be some back and forth negotiation, even with the holdout part of this process. And by the way, just to bring it all up to speed, Kyron Williams is actually earning $5.3 million in change because of his proven performance escalator this year. So again, they're both kind of right there, neck and neck in terms of their style of play, how much production they've had, some time missed, some fumble considerations, and their financials heading towards either free agency or some sort of extension. $40,000 a day fine. It can be waived if the team agrees to do so. Once we get into preseason, if they're missing preseason games, it's 1/18 of that salary I just mentioned. And obviously that would carry through the regular season as well. Any games missed, 1/18. Are they willing to forego, a significant amount? It's almost $300,000 per preseason / regular season week missed to lock themselves in a 2-year guarantee. Look, I'm not going to tell anybody how to handle their business, but we have seen just how important, obviously, the top tier of running backs are to their respective teams. And we have seen those players handsomely rewarded from a financial standpoint in back-to-back seasons. So the top of the market is thriving where it should be. The numbers aren't as big, not nearly as close to as big as the wide receivers or even the tight ends right now. But there is pot sweetening. There is incentives. There are things that are happening that are properly compensating the top players at this position. So for players who are maybe considered in tier 2, it is their turn to drive this market forward a little bit. And if that means forcing the Bills to bring in, a street free agent on a veteran minimum contract to fill in for James Cook while he puts his foot down for a couple of weeks, I don't think it's the worst stand in the world. Now, I can tell you right now, both of these organizations, the Rams and the Bills, have rookie running backs slotted right underneath them. Okay. And they are doing their diligence pretty much every draft to make sure they have at least one other person in the pipeline for instances like this, for leverage, but obviously just for depth and to cover up for injuries that are going to happen at a rapid pace at this position. So it's a fascinating dichotomy. I would imagine both front offices and maybe even the coaching staffs feel like they could handle life without either of these players respectively, which is never a good position for a player sitting at a negotiating table. If the team across from you that's writing down the information on the paper feels like they don't necessarily need you, that you're not truly irreplaceable, then any number you're spitting out is going to be undercut. So it comes down to just how long these holdouts will actually last and who will bend and break first. And at that point in time, will the other party, right? If it's James Cook who bends first on a 4 for 40, 2 for 20 practicality, will Kyron then essentially say, look, let's just get this done. I want at least that, maybe even a slight bump, and we'll go from there. But certainly something to monitor. The running back stuff's been in vogue here for the last couple of months, really the past 18 months, with Barkley hitting free agency, Derrick Henry hitting free agency for the first time, and a couple other names at least holding up the court from a production standpoint against some decently sized running back contracts that this league has desperately needed. This won't be the next wave of them, is the long answer to this rant. They will be compensated at some point in time. It may come in 2026 free agency. And spoiler, in terms of the piece that I put out there for James Cook, that's exactly what I have planned here. Is if he's going to be the one that holds out, I don't think Buffalo will bend, which means that he may end up having to play out this $5.3 million salary and find himself as maybe the top running back on the open market in 2026 next March, to which we've had a decent, good, run at free agent contract, but he won't be anywhere near the $15 million per year that he's expecting, or at least asking for, public facing right now out of the Buffalo Bills. Elsewhere on this list, tons of wide receivers. I realize that it's been, a bunch of off seasons where we've talked wide receivers to death, but we do have a few more that are sitting here in the pipeline. And I think for all intents might be holding in here over the course of the next few days at their respective mini camps. The big one being Terry McLaurin, who's 29. He's entering the contract year. This is an up and coming team, obviously, with the Jaden Daniels about face. There are mouths that have been fed, but not a ton. They did acquire Deebo Samuel. That's an expensive 1 year for them, but it's not backbreaking. And by no means is it a long-term investment. So there's youth at the running back position. There's youth at the wide receiver position. And then there's Terry McLaurin, the guy who's kind of been here through a few iterations of Washington football team / commander roster construction. Is he here for the long term? You have to think that at least for the next 2 to 3 years, he's in their plans running through his age 31 season. This feels a little Chris Godwin-y, right? Even if at some point in time, Washington goes out and secures a true number one to go on top of him, which would be good business at his age, he's still a much, much viable WR2 in this system with the relationship he's now building with Jaden Daniels. So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a 2-year guarantee that can probably vest the 3 early in that 3rd season. So what does that look like? Well, I can tell you, mathematically speaking, and just from a practicality standpoint, DK Metcalf's contract does make a heck of a lot of sense here. Pittsburgh's not going to give you too much guaranteed out of the gate, but they went and guaranteed 60 of the $132 million they handed to DK Metcalf this offseason when they acquired him from Seattle. He's 28, so he's got an extra year. So maybe things are a little bit aggressive in terms of bringing this back to Terry McLaurin's world, but not necessarily. Okay? Because Washington's not as pot committed as some teams are. All right? And we've seen players come down a little bit in price. We've seen teams overpay in situations like this all the time. There's a compromising piece, which should be, right, $32 million a year, somewhere around there. Let's put it on a 4-year, a 3-year extension. So a 4-year contract total. And let's guarantee right around this 60 million mark. Maybe 45 is guaranteed at signing. And he's got to get to that 3rd year to get to vest the full 60. Makes a ton of sense for both sides here, but there is some back and forth here, and Washington is playing a little bit of hardball. And then elsewhere, we'll finish on this before we flip the switch. A couple of young kids who, if you asked me a couple of years ago, or even just 18 months ago, they weren't even on my extension radar. One is Drake London in Atlanta, and the other is Garrett Wilson with the Jets. These are names. These are first-round picks. These are players who should be all in on these extensions, and I think in perfect scenarios, probably already have their extension after becoming extension eligible this past December. It's trending in the right direction for both. And to bury the lead, I've got both getting these contracts this summer, not having to wait one more offseason. But you want to tell me the Jets' brand new front office, brand new coaching staff, and now brand new quarterback in Justin Fields want to give this a minute to make sure that this relationship is going to work or that Fields is going to be the guy? I can understand that. But I'll tell you right now, I think despite the mess that has happened with the Jets, and Aaron Rodgers was not a mess, the injury was a mess. Wilson has kind of shown through as one of those players that you can tell has it or enough of it and should be considered a focal point piece, a core piece for the next 3 years. And if that's the case, you do this extension now. Okay, you follow the Philadelphia model. You follow the model of teams that understand that players that need to get paid should get paid immediately. And if we have to cut off an extra year at the end, we'll do it. He's the right age. He's only 24 right now. He's on a 2 for 20 guarantee already because of the 5th-year option they exercised. So you can lock this thing up. Oh, by the way, before maybe he goes out and has an explosive 2025, which is certainly within his right. And then, adds another 40% to his overall piece because the cap is going way up, because the Jets now know they have a 1-2 punch, because maybe Justin Fields ends up looking like a long-term option for them, a quarterback, and the entire team gets more expensive. Get it done now before some things go right for you. Let's put it that way. And if they don't go right, he's an immeasurably tradable piece. So you'll pay a signing bonus this year, and you'll have trade assets to work with going forward if the wheels fall off this season for the Jets, and a lot of pieces have to fall off with it. So Drake London, I think, is a little bit safer with the Penix Jr. setup, and there's a little bit of a showcase for that already in place. But with Garrett Wilson, financially speaking, by the way, these two are deadlocked. So it's another one of those Kyron Williams, James Cook scenarios where if one bends, one breaks, maybe that forces the other hand as well. But two interesting names that are sort of up and coming that feel like no-brainer decisions for where these franchises respectively are heading over the next couple of seasons. All right, that full piece is live on Spotrac.com. It's called Predicting Notable NFL Summer Extension Candidates. I really went on a ledge on that one, but go ahead and find that on the socials or on the site itself. And as always, thoughts and comments are welcome at Spotrac on all the social networks. Let's bring in Dan Soemann to talk a little baseball. All right, Dan, it's been a minute since we talked baseball. There's been a pretty good up and down, back and forth here to start the season. The usual suspects from a player standpoint are doing their usual thing, but we do have a couple of teams that I think are worth talking about from a negative standpoint that have sort of fallen into the abyss a little bit here to start the 2025 season. We're about, 65 games in here. So the sample size is at least strong enough to start having real discussions about it. And that trade deadline is about 6 weeks away here, July 31st. We're going to get to that in a second because I know you've been doing a hell of a lot of work getting this ready for that and what kind of fireworks we might see come August 1st. But let's start with some teams. I gave you a quick piece of homework last week, just sort of start to bucket these teams together. The buyers, the maybe buyers, the actual sellers, and then maybe some of those teams that are stuck in the middle right now. Again, the sample size is big enough, I think, for you to make some educated guesses. In terms of the sellers, I think we all kind of know the names because some of these are, having historically bad seasons to start the year, and some of them are just always on this list. But give me one or two teams that are absolutely going to be sellers, but are also going to be very important sellers because of who they may be sending off to some of these contending teams in 2025.
Well, that's kind of the tricky thing in terms of the bona fide sellers, that some of those teams don't really have a ton of appealing pieces at this point. It's more of like the fringe teams that we're kind of waiting for to commit themselves to being sellers, if you will. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some pieces that could be useful, Luis Robert, et cetera, to contenders. But it's really like that next tier that we're waiting for, the Orioles, the Braves, those type of teams. Yeah,
the Marlins probably should have been on this list, but Sandy Alcantara's having just a career worst season. There's something way off there. Is he even on the list for you anymore, or do you think that Miami just holds tight there?
My sense is that he still gets moved. I think I tend to believe there's still the thought around the league that he's still a valuable piece down the stretch. This first year off of injury, we've seen a lot of pitchers struggle with it. I think his last two starts, we've seen a little bit of a pitch mix change where he's sort of abandoned the slider, which has kind of been a major issue with him this year. So, that might be a sign of things to come over his next few starts. B, maybe a team sees that and says, "Oh, well, we can take that even a step further." So, considering the price, the constant need for pitching on the open market, I tend to still believe that he will get moved. But that's exactly what I was alluding to.
Yeah.
A lot of these pieces that even weeks or months ago we thought would be big time movers, they're less appealing at this point right now.
I think in terms of Washington, another team you've got on this list, which makes sense. They've got a bona fide closer in Kyle Finnegan who's going to get moved, right? They moved him and brought him back, and I feel like that could be the case again in 2025. So that's at least a piece of significance. Every contender is looking for more bullpen help, and if they can bring in a guy who's got leading the league in saves right now on a team that's sliding backwards a little bit here, that smells pretty decent in-season move here. So I'd put those two names at least in the conversation. I'll give you one more at least because I've had my soapbox moments with this team, but I don't think I've given you the floor yet. How big does Colorado go here, or can they go here? Because I know they've got some salaries on the books that they probably would like to dump, alongside of this historic start. But is it even feasible that they move some of these pieces in the next couple of weeks?
Well, that's the thing is seemingly they have some interesting pieces, but I think the owner or the president came out and said Ryan McMahon is a franchise player. We're not moving him, that they have no desire to move Kyle Freeland. Now, maybe that's just public posturing. I understand that. But if a team going essentially nowhere is really trying to anchor into quote franchise players, it's not like there's some storied career there of long-term success that they were so willing to move on from guys like Nolan Arenado, Trevor Story, who actually had some history with the team.
Yeah.
I don't know why they wouldn't, these guys would actually truly be off limits. So, as an organization, that's a whole probably separate entire podcast, the direction that they're headed in. But seemingly, yeah, there are some pieces here that they would probably want to move on from. But if they can, I guess that's another story.
I guess quickly on that, just to follow up, where is this organization headed in terms of the prospect pool and things like that? Like, is the ownership coming out saying this just to cover some butt? Or do you think that there's a world where this team flips it around pretty quickly over the course of the next 2 seasons and actually, looks pretty good for holding some of these pieces in 2025?
There are interesting pieces in the organization, but there have been interesting pieces in this organization. It just hasn't. I don't know exactly what it is, but to some degree, it's the development. Like you had spoke about last podcast. With Brandon, that the ownership has committed to contracts, but it's an extremely hard place to really develop a team in terms of pitching where like spin rates, things like that, it's just less effective in that environment in Colorado. So building a complete team is going to be difficult no matter the circumstances. It seems like they're just spinning tires at this point, trying to kind of do what they've been doing over the better part of the last decade here. Can
I make a suggestion and have you run with it a little bit here? Because I brought up the stadium a couple times now over the past couple of episodes as sort of like the albatross that, we think of Coors Field as this home run, absolute home run machine because of the altitude and yada, yada. But, it's an extra base machine. Why hasn't this organization, at least over the course of the past decade, just tried to become the fastest team in baseball history from a positional standpoint? Why haven't they tried, especially now with the way the game is set up and how much more important the stolen base has become, at least over the past couple of seasons with the rule changes? Why isn't that the onus, the focus, at least from a positional standpoint, to trying to go out there and just being the team that scores the most runs every way possible? Home runs are going to happen, right? Because of the altitude, because of the dimensions, they're going to happen. But it just feels like this team is missing an entire element of the offense that comes with their home field advantage. Is that an incorrect statement?
No, it's fair. I just think it alludes to the greater issue, like the organizational development in general.
The drafting process, everything, right?
Yeah, and it's really hard to. We've seen this for a while. It's hard to get an accurate assessment of those guys, even when they're successful in Coors Field. And not to mention, their AAA affiliate plays in the PCL, which is a notorious hitter's haven. So it's even really hard to know what is truth and what is, false signal in some of those scenarios. So I guess what I'm trying to say, I have no idea. They do have some, Charlie Condon is a franchise offensive player. Now, they need to kind of run with that, but it's just in recent years, they just haven't put the full thing together, and it's going to be really hard in that division going forward. So
you have more faith in the White Sox or the Rockies over the next couple of seasons?
Oh, the White Sox. And I know that's probably difficult to hear considering where they're at right now, but I at least think they're headed in the right direction. Even if things don't pan out, I think the moves they're making and how they're trying to build is the correct way.
Okay. You've got 7 dead set buyers here. All of them, maybe not the Phillies, most of them legitimate World Series contenders. And I should be cautious with the Phillies because they always come storming back like a what at the end of the season here. But Cubs, Tigers, Astros, Dodgers, Mets, Yankees, Phillies, all major contenders. Who needs to buy the most?
Good question. I guess the need part of that is subjective, if you will.
I mean, the Phillies bullpen is a need constantly, every day, all day, every month.
And now the Jose Alvarado thing just adds fuel to that fire. I think the Cubs, I very much like that. Let me phrase. I want to be careful how I phrase this. I think the Cubs need to make a move. I don't know what that move is quite yet, and I also think they don't know what that move is yet, which is why they're sort of seeing how this plays out leading up to the deadline. Honestly, I hate to even put this there. The Dodgers pitching, they have to address it. So to think of this team that was supposedly ruining the entire sport just a couple months ago, needs to be buyers at the deadline. I do want to say that lightly. But the pitching is going to be an issue if health goes the wrong way over the next couple months there. So other than that, I don't know if I feel like that any team specifically needs to be a buyer. It's just going to be kind of adding around the fringes, but I am convinced all of those teams will be in the mix, adding guys at the deadline for sure.
All right, we'll get back to the Mets in a second because there's some fascinating storylines that are going to be derived, I think, at least through the rest of the season and then into the offseason. But how about these teams in the middle? Give me one or two teams that you are watching like a hawk over the course of the next 6 weeks. A, to see if they become buyers or sellers, or B, because they have arguably the 1 to 2 to 3 trade chip pieces that could change the course of the rest of the season going forward.
Well, I'm always watching Cleveland, for obvious reasons. There's not a monster impact move there to be made, I don't think, though. So not much to really talk about there. I think this might be surprising. I think the team to watch is the Cardinals. John Mozeliak's last year in St. Louis, it's hard to believe he really wants to not tank, but be a seller if they're remotely in it. But they have some pretty interesting pieces to move on from. And they can really flip this thing real quick if they choose to go that route. So I don't know how it's going to go, but with, the circumstances surrounding that, that's going to be a real interesting spot to watch because of the pieces that could shake loose. You got Ryan Helsley there. Yeah. Obviously Arenado's been a long time rumored guy. You might get into the Sonny Grays. You have pitchers, Miles Mikolas stuff. So there are some other bullpen arms I didn't mention. They could be a big one to watch. Yep.
Yeah, but they're in that wild card conversation right now. Kind of unbelievably, right? Because that division is beating itself up a little bit. The Cubs are starting to run away with it. The Cubs are kind of hitting on all cylinders right now, as you mentioned. But yeah, they're stuck a little bit, and they know they have pieces they need to move. That feels like a buy and sell to me. That feels like one of those teams that's going to try to stay in contention, but they're not going to be dumb enough not to get some assets for some of these players that are maybe playing on fumes here a little bit to finish off the season. I got to toss Seattle into this mix. We have not talked Seattle in a long time. But this Cal Raleigh stuff just doesn't happen, Dan. We don't see players this young get paid like this and then just hit the ground running to the point of where it's not sustainable. But this is certainly who this player is going to be for the better course of his young career. They just can't hit at all around him at all, and that's including the complete fall off of Julio Rodriguez, who we thought might have 6 MVPs by 2030, right? So, and by the way, they did too. They built it into his contract. So it's a weird situation. They still have one of the best rotations in all of baseball. Maybe in terms of a surplus, could this be a team that looks at itself and says, look, we got to give up on an arm or two here because we've got to be able to hit the ball, especially now that we've got this guy in the middle of our lineup?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I don't know where they add though in particular. It feels like they made a lot of their moves in the offseason, and whether it pans out or not is, TBD. So I don't know what they do, but I do agree with you that you have a surplus seemingly. Do they dig into that to supplement the offense? Good question.
It's a fascinating team. All right. Couple teams that are going backwards that I think we can have real discussions about. Texas can't hit. Boston's inconsistent, and the Orioles, I know they've had their moments, but for the most part, they have been just a massive disappointment this offseason. Where do those three teams sit for you? And that's fully aware that Boston has big pieces they could buy with and big pieces they could sell with over the course of the next few months here. They may be stuck a little bit in the middle, but those are three teams I'm watching closely.
Yeah, I'll start with the Rangers. I think they're still in contention for the division, quite honestly. Like, things have went so poorly to start, and they're still in it, in my opinion, that's kind of the team that I could see going on. You've gotten nothing from Marcus Semien. Corey Seager's battled injuries. Evan Carter in and out of the lineup. Aroldis Garcia looks lost at the plate most of the season. So if they can get it going offensively at all, and those guys have a lengthy track record of being productive offensive players, I think that is the easiest turnaround in my opinion. So, but again, like you said, if things really slide here in the next couple of weeks, they do have some intriguing pieces to move on from. So, who'd you say? Oh, the Orioles.
Yeah.
Man, what a disaster this has been.
I don't get it.
And I think it's all going to go to the Mike Elias thing. Does this front office want him to be in charge of like a flippening of this 40-man roster, if you will?
Let's talk about it in a little bit more of a roster construction standpoint, Dan, because this is a team that is built and we anticipated this team because of their youth, right? Nobody came here thinking, Zach Eflin's going to be the glue guy that makes this team go to the finish line. Nobody thought that. Now you can say they swung and missed on Corbin Burns. They didn't do anything else from a major free agent standpoint. Fine. Everybody's saying that. I want to go to the kids specifically because you're big on the draft develop, and do it the right way and get these kids, ramped up to the point of where they can have long Major League Baseball careers. Did the Baltimore Orioles miss a couple of steps here and force these kids into the batter's box too early, despite the fact that they're bona fide top 10, top prospects in the league and should be game ready when they were called up? Do you think that there was a development miss here? And that should be the real conversation, because without that, it doesn't matter who you add in free agency. If these kids can't play at this level right now, you're never going to win enough ball games to matter.
So there's a reason I'm sitting behind a computer and not in a front office. But if I'm sort of analyzing what their flaws were, at some point so they accumulated all of these high draft picks, high talent, high pedigree type of players, right? At some point, you really have to narrow down which guys are your core and who you're going to dedicate playing time to, and not middle it. And so you've seen the Colby Mayos of the world come out, express frustration. Even in hindsight, other players have kind of said, like, I didn't, I think it was Kyle Stowers or Connor Norby, one of those guys that moved to Miami last year at the deadline, spoke publicly about like they really just like couldn't get into a rhythm because of playing time. So,
and you're talking in the minor leagues, they were stacked up so much they weren't getting enough reps, right?
Minors, and then into the majors though, they come up and they're like playing 4 days a week, platoon bats. At some point, those players, you just got to let it go and they sink or swim. Now, you don't need to give them 3 years to try and figure it out, but you have to give them some sort of consistent playing time. Now, we can kind of that is sort of my judge on the Orioles, which we can kind of transition into the Red Sox, because I think they're sort of forecasting that same issue coming up, which is why you started to see the Jared Durans mentioned in trade talks here, is because the Red Sox are trying to avoid exactly what the Orioles just did by sort of log jamming all of their talent
and also why Roman Anthony's not here yet, right? They're letting him have his moment right now and exacerbates this gigantic run he's having in the minor league system versus coming up cold to the major leagues and trying to plateau that, right? I mean,
right.
He's not going to be that player for the Boston Red Sox. So you let him cool off a little bit and you slowly bring him into the fold, right, when things are a little easier.
Well, and the timing of the service time doesn't hurt. The Super 2 line doesn't hurt here at all. Like, they have natural coverage for it, so why not utilize it, kind of thing. But the overall point remains, they just signed Ceddanne Rafaela last year, who debatable if he's actually an outfielder long term, but it seems like he's an impact center fielder. He can move around, et cetera, et cetera. But let's just pencil him in because he signed long term. Mm-hmm. You also have Jarren Duran, Wilyer Abreu, both, and then you have Roman Anthony. You're not going to split. I really find it hard to believe they're just going to divvy up playing time amongst those 4 players, which means you probably have to move on from one of those, probably being Jarren Duran or Wilyer Abreu. And that's not because those players are bad by any means, because quite the opposite. They're very valuable right now, and they could probably fetch quite a return to kind of jumpstart whatever this organization is still lacking. So just to kind of clarify, because I completely agree with you. The Orioles drafted, developed, acquired too many talent at the same time, got themselves in a logjam, and didn't do enough about it to further their roster, to balance their roster positionally better, to make sure everybody was properly up to speed with enough reps through the process. And now they're at a position where there's a lot of guys who are 75% of the way there. They're still crossing themselves over on playing time, right? There's still 4 shortstops, right? There's still 3 right fielders that are coming up together, and they kind of refuse to pull the trigger on any of them, right? Even to this day. Well, right. And I think from a building, organizational development building standpoint, it's better to just have a surplus of pitchers than it is position players, because you can get those guys in easier. So at some point, they should have seen that log jam of talent from a positional standpoint and turned it into pitching, even if those guys don't work. Now, Grayson Rodriguez, Kyle Bradish, it's not their fault necessarily. Those guys broke and didn't necessarily develop as anticipated, but at some point they needed to kind of flip that around. And I know someone out there is listening and saying, well, didn't they do that with Trevor Rogers? Well, it was too late at that point. My point is earlier in that process, they needed to flip that into some arms. And here they are chasing a 40-year-old Charlie Morton and, these guys that just, it didn't work out. The Corbin Burns thing aside, it's easy hindsight. He's injured now, et cetera. That was never going to work. In my opinion, the guys they replaced it with, once Grayson Rodriguez, once Kyle Bradish, et cetera, went down, you weren't going to easily replace those guys via free agency like they attempted to. So
I desperately want this organization to be the next iteration of the Houston Astros, and I'm terrified that they're headed toward Angels company. I'm terrified that they're about to turn into the Angels for the next 10 years, which is a ton of names that we love to follow and we're dying to latch onto, but we can't get there because they're so inconsistent. They refuse to kind of make the right big moves. And they're just going to kind of die in infamy over the next decade.
Let's finish with some optimism.
Sure.
I mean, they do have literal cornerstone franchise players in the organization. So if they want to commit to Adley Rutschman, I know Rutschman has had a down year, but let's just say Gunnar Henderson. I don't know why I said Rutschman first. Gunnar Henderson specifically. Let's say you want to commit. That is a huge check mark that they can cross off by just paying their own guy right there, right? So there is talent in the organization that this thing is it's not a total gut job. So, but I mean, they got to make moves. They got to do something. Yeah.
Better be active this deadline and this offseason respectively. The time is long past. Let's get to 2 Mets and get out of here, Dan. You kind of brought this to my attention because I guess even when the contract was signed, I never thought we'd get here with Edwin Diaz, the Mets closer. We're in year 3 of a 5-year, $102 million contract that does have a club option on the back end of it as well. He went through that funky little World Baseball Classic injury. Things kind of got derailed for a little bit there. We kind of forgot he was arguably the best closer in all of baseball. He's 31 and change from an age standpoint, so still a couple years of really good prime left in him. And he's been absolutely lights out for 6 weeks here. And I mean, the slider looks like the slider. Everything is ticking on all cylinders. And we're now heading towards that line of demarcation in this contract where he can opt out of the remaining 2+ seasons and start this thing all over again. Again, my headspace wasn't even there because, at $20.5 million a year, at $102 million fully guaranteed, it just seemed like this was a one and done conversation. You think differently. You think there's a realistic chance that he at least looks for a longer term here this offseason, right? And opts out of this thing.
Well, it really comes down to I just don't know until we get later in the season. It's going to be so, I mean, even as a Met fan, you can probably admit if the Mets are in the playoffs and he looks terrible in the playoffs, you are going to be maybe hoping that he opts out and go, do you know what I mean? Like, there's going to be a lot of recency bias is my point here. If he looks good at the end of the year and into the playoffs, there's going to be no issue with him opting out, going and getting another big deal. But if it looks bad, I'm just mostly laying out the case that the money owed to him over the next 2 years is not insignificant. That's all I'm trying to say. It's 2 years, 28 mil, 14 mil AAV. Not many. There's only 4 other players who have multi-year deals at that amount of money. The floor for veteran relievers we've seen be around that $10 million AAV, but it's not multi-years, right? So that's my only point here, is that it's not an insignificant amount of money for him to walk away from if he doesn't look like an elite closer by the end of the year. If you had to
guess, and I'll just give this as the framework because this is kind of the name attached to him. Josh Hader and he are almost identical age, 31 years, 2 months old right now, right? So, I mean, they've gone pound for pound, and contractually, Hader got 19, Edwin got 20.4. They're right there, right? Now, Hader's got 3.5 years fully guaranteed left. There's no opt-outs, nothing like that. But he's making a straight $19 million a year with cash, right? So you just laid out the fact that Edwin's deal had deferred money, had a signing bonus. A chunk of the cash has already been handed to Edwin Diaz. He's down in the 13 to 14 million per year range cash-wise right now. Is that the change that has to happen here? Is he going to opt out now with the mindset of, I'm just going to get myself up to Josh Hader's world, right? I want to make 19 to 20 million per year, even if it's just for the next 3 seasons, right? So the term really doesn't change. But is it a course correction to align himself with the top paid closers around the same age? Or do you think there's a real chance that he just sticks with this thing through 2027?
I mean, the fact that like you had said, his current deal was kind of front loaded. His back years are not paying him what market value is. Yeah, he should certainly opt out if he looks good, right? This is one that, I think my point here is we could project this back and forth all year based on the last 4 weeks. If he has a disastrous June here, we're going to be saying, oh crap, he's toast. He's going to have to opt into that remaining amount. He's never going to find that on the open market. But if he looks like he has over the last month here, he's certainly going to opt out of that.
Okay. But, so then I got to follow up with this, because Mets GM David Stearns did not sign this contract with Edwin Diaz. He did not sign Josh Hader in Milwaukee, and he did not sign Devin Williams in Milwaukee. So let's say you're right, and I think you're on the right path here, and Edwin does opt out of this contract. Is David Stearns going to sign him to a restructured, renegotiated, multi-year guaranteed contract at 32 years old? Or could this be the last 4 months of Edwin Diaz as a New York Met?
I mean, in this window, let me be clear on this. Opting out would mean this is not like he's not refinding a 7-6 year long-term deal, right? He's opting out for a 2-3 year deal closer to closer to market value. We've seen these guys 1 year deal. Like he beyond that, he can get 1 year, $10 million till his arm falls off, probably, right? So that being said, in this window of contention for the Mets, I don't see them bailing on him. If this is all contingent on how he looks by the end of the year, but if he's still an elite closer, it's hard for me to think that the Mets would abandon that. But
in the current climate of baseball financials, if Edwin were to opt out, is there a team out there ready to throw 4 for $80 at him? That's
the big question. At that number, I think there's some caveat, a club option. I think it's the straight 4 for 80 guaranteed. It might be tough, but
okay. It's one to watch because he's rounded back into form. He is the X factor relief pitcher for this offseason if he opts out. So It's kind of a chess versus checkers situation. You know, the Mets are at least already nibbling at this conversation to understand where things are headed. But you know, we're about to talk about Pete Alonso, who's in a very similar boat, Dan. But there's a world where they lose both of these players in 2026 for obvious financial reasons, right?
Yeah, for sure. And if not, they're just bringing back the team at another expensive price, you know,
at a ridiculous price, right? Because exactly. if we flip the Pete here, I think he's unarguably the NL MVP 65 games into the season right now. And I understand that you know, anybody beating Ohtani at that pace has to be doing something special. He's doing everything that he's being asked and more. He can opt out of the 2 for 55, leaving the 1 for 24 remaining on the table. He's certainly worth more than that in terms of an annual average and in terms of a multi-year guarantee. But here we are again. I feel like we talked this to death last offseason, and rightfully so. It never came to fruition. We had a few players go down this route, Alex Bregman being another one in Boston. But Pete is the one now kind of pushing back, right? He's the on steroids version of Matt Chapman from 2023, who ended up getting an in-season extension with the Giants last offseason. So where are we headed with Pete Alonso, numbers-wise, you know, in terms of his stability with the Mets? And, you know, I think the opt-out has already opted itself, right?
For sure. I mean, I think it opted itself when it was signed, but barring what he did this year, and he's only obviously supported that case here. So
30 going on 31 this offseason.
Yeah. So this might be shocking. Maybe it's a hot take. I still have trouble thinking he's like positioned himself for some mega like this has been this is the right
conversation. You're right. You're right.
So I don't think this has positioned him for some new massive deal that we haven't talked about just because this season is getting put together.
Yeah.
Now, what I want to see over the next few months, is this plate approach change actually real, or is he going to have a prolonged stretch where he really struggles, it compounds and compounds, and he goes back to the player that he was for most of the beginning of his career in terms of higher strikeouts, et cetera, lower OBP. Now, I'm not trying to ding him. All I'm trying to say is he is still very much the player that he has been his whole career, that people had question marks coming into last offseason. Now, I understand the numbers are incredible. If he wins an MVP, good on him for putting it together in another contract season. But the point I'm trying to make is I think this just earns him the contract he was looking for plus a little bit more. So like if somebody out there thinks he's going to make $350 million now, I don't know if I totally believe that, but I'd be willing to listen to the opposite argument.
I think before the year, and when we saw where he landed, he ended up back with the Mets. It felt like, you know, he chose to take a little less to come back to the Mets, which gives the Mets a little bit more leverage, I think, here going forward. It all seemed like he was accepting the suppression, right? Except for the fact that his agent is still Scott Boras. That didn't change. And we have seen situations where players gone through the process, ended up in a one-year showcase situation, fired Boras, brought in somebody who could get them a little bit more stability going forward because they didn't want to go through another volatile offseason. Pete's not done that. Okay, Pete has accepted 2025. He has already outkicked his coverage on the field with it. And he still has Boras in his back pocket for whatever's going to happen in December when he opts out, right? So I'm not expecting this to turn into, you know, Paul Goldschmidt or Anthony Rizzo taking 1-2 year deals just to latch on with the right team. My anticipation for Pete this offseason, he is still looking to max out. It's just, what does that mean, right? And that's what you and I are trying to decide right now. I can tell you right now, just because of where the team is headed, what Pete has done, again, he's got to stay on that track. And whatever accolades he might have, this feels so much like Freddie Freeman in Atlanta. It feels so much like the cutoff point where somebody's going to step in and offer the money, the average, and the term that the Mets simply don't want to go to. and somebody's going to win that battle. Now, Steve Cohen doesn't lose many battles, right? In terms of being topped out, as we just saw over the past couple off seasons here. But it feels like that's where we're headed. It feels less like Pete's going to get a 2-year guarantee or a 3-year guarantee, and that somebody's going to overpay this time around for their version of Freddie Freeman. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, in our player option piece, I broke down the numbers a little bit. So Pete Alonso fired his agent and hired Scott Boras after he declined the original extension from the Mets, which was rumored to be 7 years, 158. So now if we fast forward, he basically needs 5 for 107. Let's call it 110. 5 years for 110 to surpass the number that he turned down when he fired his agent to hire Scott Boras. Okay. So you're
including all the salary he's made since then. Yep.
Exactly. Correct. So that comes out to $21.5 million. Over 5 years he needs to make, basically. So what I'm saying is 5 for 110 is like the baseline,
the foundation.
Exactly.
Because then you adjust for inflation, you adjust for the tax. Absolutely. Yep.
Right. So let's call 21.5. Let's call that, like, let's say he's earned, like, this year they took a $30 million deal, but that's got deferrals and or had a signing bonus, etc. So let's even call that just he's earned $25 million a year for the next 5 years. That's $125 million. My point is that he's just not, he hasn't done anything to say, oh, now that $21.5 million number is suddenly $40 million or something like that. That's my only point here. But yeah, I certainly think he's done enough to earn what is coming to him, as in, let's call it 5 for 120 is kind of where I think, is like the low point. But I mean, do you think it's going to get, am I like way low on this?
I'll round it all back in the form. We'll come full circle with Scott Boras here. I mentioned the Chapman situation out in San Francisco. Chapman was on a 3 for 54 that could opt out of 1 for 18 after the first season, right? That's what he did. He opted out after 1 for 18 because he got an extension that was 6 for 151, which is $25.1 million per year. It's right there. This stuff is right there. And by the way, that 6th year is exactly what we're talking about, right? So if you and I are both comfortable with Pete on a 5-year guarantee, it's only going to take one team to come in with that 6th year and Freddie Freeman this thing and take Freddie Freeman off of Atlanta to the Dodgers, where he's now become a world champion with them, right? So that's what we're saying. If 5 at 25 is the comfortable signing for the Mets, who's going to be the team that comes in with one more year? That's what we're dealing with over the next couple of months here, I think, for sure.
Me too. And let me put a broad stroke over what I'm trying to say. Last offseason, there was a lot of concern whether he was closer to a $25 million player or a $20 million player. And this was the year he had to prove that give me that ceiling number. And I think he's proved that out to the point where he's going to get that over the term that he wants, if you will, right? This isn't going to turn into some 10 for, $300 million or anything like that. But I think 5 at around $25 million AAV, if you want to add that 6 year, like Matt Chapman got, like you just laid out, I'm fine with that. That's where the importance is going to be over the next few months, in my opinion. He's already done what he's done, but if he can really prove that the changes are real as he heads into the second half of his career here, I think the money's going to be there in the offseason for sure. Does
6 for 180 get it done right now if Steve Cohen makes that offer?
I would think so. I would think so.
Me too. And I don't think that's too crazy either way. Too much money for the Mets to spend in their climate and too much for Scott Boras to say yes to, right? I mean, so I think there's a world where that might be the Godfather offer that can be made to make all of this offseason go away, because it's just a fact, right? And we started the conversation with Seattle, Dan. That's a team right there that could go 6 years to bring in Pete Alonso to be that guy with Julio Rodriguez, with Cal Raleigh, just to say, hit the damn ball out for us, man, right? Like everything else on this team is ready to go. We need somebody who can just do this on a consistent basis. So I think the Mets are in a situation where they're going to have to start negotiating tomorrow, not July 1st, not August 1st, not November 1st, to try to jump this thing. But it's a fascinating watch with the best team in the National League headed down the stretch here. Good work. We'll be back with the trade deadline stuff soon and plenty more to get to. Thanks, Dan.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.